and I'm now joined by D.S. Murray from Shetland. Donald, we recently spoke about literary matters and your own literary achievements, but thought we would get you back just to have a discussion about your thoughts about maybe wider things in our communities. And one of the things that I know you seem to have concerns about are what you've been calling in your recent article in the Gazette a sort of, is it like a fantasy area of politics that you seem to think we're all now in? What's that about?
I think we are all now in. I think the whole of Europe is now moving towards that kind of thing. I think we saw the election results in the Netherlands, fairly recently. We have seen it in Slovakia. We're seeing it. I mean, I think even in France, the signs are all there that the whole of Europe, and perhaps even beyond that. Well, I think also South America and also perhaps North America. We're all moving to that fantasy world of politics, and that worries me a great deal. There's always been, I was watching something about Julius Caesar on television the other night, and there's always been that kind of, how shall I put it, pendulum movement in politics, where you go for a kind of democratic way of life, and then all of a sudden you move towards, I better not use the word dictatorship, but a kind of unthinking mentality where all that matters is the cause you follow.
I'm just trying to put my finger on what you mean. To a certain extent, I suppose politics is a sort of unreal world in any case, because they're all trying to achieve something. All politicians are trying to achieve something better, whether they're in government or not. They're trying to achieve something for which they will receive credit and win the next election. It's what it's all about. So to a certain extent, maybe all politics are and perhaps have been unreal anyway.
Oh yeah, but I think there are periods where that lack of reality becomes even stronger. And I think we're going through that at the moment, unfortunately. I think you're perfectly right. That always will, no matter what political party is in charge, there will always be flaws in the way that we do things. But I do think there is this, how shall I put it, almost follow my leader mentality that's becoming more and more pervasive, where we fail to do the basic thing that's really important and central to any democracy, is to hold our politicians accountable. And I think I perceive that virtually everywhere. I certainly perceive that in my own native islands. Are
we not doing that?
I don't think you're doing that at the moment. I think the lack of public meetings is astonishing. Here, for instance, I stay here in Shetland, and I see politically, even when it came up before the Brexit referendum, we had a meeting here, which was actually organised by Shetland SNP. But they had a meeting in which people from the agricultural, fishing, oil, tourist industry were all involved on the top table, and asked questions about their views on Brexit. The guy who was in the fishing industry was very enthusiastic about the idea for Brexit. There was also, how should I put it, a period of consultations with those in charge of all the local industries. I saw Ulster Michael, who is the MP here, organising meetings and saying, that's a sensible, responsible way of undertaking politics. That at all times you try and inform the public of what's going on. You have a responsibility to do that. and there's all sorts of issues. Now, Brexit was an example. I think recently you've had the first meetings in the Western Isles about offshore wind farms. Now, my own view is these meetings should have been held when the whole notion was first aired. I don't know how many years ago is that? Yeah. Now, when they first talked about.
It is a few years, right? I can't remember when we first.
It's certainly about. I think it's probably about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't do that, you allow, in a sense, rumours to prevail. You allow ill-informed voices to gain to gain the greatest echo, and sometimes, and I think that's true of any community and any issue. So that would be, that's something I feel very, very central. And in particular at the moment I notice the tunnelling issue, which is now being discussed. And, as I say,
it's a great idea. You must admit it's going to save us ferry fares for decades to come. You can't be against tunnels as a way of safe, secure transport to the islands, surely.
I have been in the Faroe Islands. They are radically different from the Western Isles. You can see, of course, that the nearest neighbour, Iain, to the Faroe Islands is Ness. Did you know that?
I think I got my wee compass out and measured the distance. It's amazing, yeah.
It's astonishing that the nearest neighbour is North Rona, which is part of Ness. Shetland is just a few miles short of that, but it's so distant. So, is the Faroe situation, which is about 400, 500 miles from Denmark, the country which is a part of, is that comparable to the Western Isles, which is, in relative terms, much closer to to its mainland, Scotland, than the Faroe Islands is to Denmark? So it's not really comparable. I also think there's a real difference in the way the islands come together. If you look at, and I'll probably get pronunciations here that wrong. I'll get this wrong at the moment. You've got islands that are not part of the cluster of the Faroe Islands. You've got Mykonos, which is the same name as the Isle of Muck, by the way. It's a Gaelic name in origin. And then I think it's Suðuroy in the very, very far south of Faroes. But most of the Faroe Islands, you're talking about 18 main islands. Most of the 18 main islands in the Faroe Islands are tightly clustered together. So if you're going to have tunnels, they are not of a great distance. You also don't have to worry about your neighbours, because the people of North Rona are not going to complain vociferously about any great transport difference between that the tunnels are going to cause. Here, the Western Isles, however, is its nearest neighbour, and would be part of that tunnel, is Skye. Now, Iain, how often have you travelled in Skye over the last wee while? Have you travelled in Skye the last?
Now and again, yes. The Tarbert to Uig link, many people find it better if they're prone to seasickness, for example. It's a shorter crossing.
Of course, it is a shorter crossing, but also the Skye Road. I travelled. I've got a son living in Staffin. And I travelled to Staffin one day in summer, and there was 18 camper vans following each other along the road. There's also the state of some of the roads. I dare say you noticed that in Skye. Would they vote in favour of another route going through that island? I think...
Fair point, but...
Yeah, human decency means that the people of Skye should be consulted.
All you're really saying is that as part of the project there should be a road improvement scheme for Uig to Kyle of Lachalsh. That's all you're saying. That's probably not too much of a problem.
I think it's a huge problem given the cash that's available to the Highland region at the moment, because it is not just Uig to Skye, Iain. It is Fort William to Carlochalsh. It is, Garv to, again to Carlochalsh. So, they're huge. If there's problems with these roads too. So that network would have to be looked at as a whole. And there are problems with that network at the moment. And unless there was a huge investment of money in the roads of Skye, then I can see why they might object to it. Now, I also believe they should be consulted in it. I think there's a human duty to consult people who will be affected by it.
And you would say that should already be happening. Is that your point?
Should be already happening. Yes, and not only that, but I think there are other disadvantages if you're going to have a tunnel network across the Hebrides. Now, Shetland is also, of course, discussing tunnels. There are only, there's only one airport which is very far south of South Mainland, Sunborough, which is miles away from Unston, Yell. There's only one airport that goes to the mainland. There is only one ferry that goes to the mainland, and that's at the moment that is from Lerwick itself. That goes all the way down to Aberdeen.
What's your point? So we have more airports. So what's your point?
You have more airports. That's my point. I was going to come to that point. You beat me off my track just before I got there. I think there is the acute danger that if you had a tunnelling system across the Western Isles, there would be an awful lot of jobs lost. The jobs would be lost in Barra, which is both an airport and a harbour. Jobs would be lost too in perhaps in various other ports all the way up. You're talking about how many ports are from the far more than there are in either Shetland or in Faroe Islands. So you've got Stornoway, you've got Tarbert, you've got Lochmaddy, you've got Loch Boysdale, you've got Castlebay. You've got 5 ports in the Western Isles. You've only got one meaningful one in Shetland. You've only got one meaningful one in the Faroe Islands. You've got you have 3 airports in the Western Isles. You only have one in the Faroe Islands. But I think these things have to be discussed before we can come to a conclusion. Because the other problem I see with the whole tunnelling thing is what you're going to get is an awful lot of tourists coming around, zipping around Paradise, like Ness or perhaps even Bernera, zipping around and then going back by tunnel, or doing the same in Battersea, without spending any money there, without contributing to the place. That's what happens in Skye.
Have you thought this through? Why, if there's a tunnel between South Harris and the north of Skye, should the airport at Ballyvanich be diminished, or for that matter, the one the beach airport on Barra?
No, but
doesn't necessarily follow that they wouldn't be required anymore. And you've got to counterbalance it all by saying the business opportunities from a safe, secure, open 24-hour tunnel are so considerable that it could have a very positive effect on these islands just by being there all the time and not so weather dependent.
Oh well, I mean, I can see that argument. I can see there is. There is a legitimate argument. There's always a legitimate argument against my case. However, there are people. For instance, the council, the main council, the group of councillors that are on the Western Isles argument, are not just arguing for one tunnel. They're arguing for tunnels, from Harris to North Uist. From South Uist to Barra. So they're arguing for a whole network of tunnels. They're not arguing for exclusion. And that's what I mean about having discussions. Having real discussions, open discussions, public discussions with the people who live in Castleby. The people who live in, Lochboystil and Dalibra, the people who live in Benbecula, the people who live in North Uist, the people who live all over the island groups. Before you can come to any meaningful conclusion about this development, it is imperative in a democracy that you have debate and discussion. And that includes, by the way, the people of Skye. They need to take part in that discussion. In the same way as the people from Unst, Yell, Fetler, Whalsa, etc., have all discussed the idea of tunnels here. That is foundation for democracy, is discussion and debate.
Councillors have been scratching their heads for decades about the need for better inter-island links. And the spinal route, of course, was the only option available to get together with better ferry links that were sought. And here we have opportunities for better inter-island links, and you, Mr. Murray, seem to be arguing against them for some reason.
No, I'm not. I mean, what I am saying is, I do remember, for instance, the people of Bernery, when the causeway was built to Bernery, there was largely a support for that. Eriskay was slightly more mixed, because Eriskay could perceive that they would lose their local school, which actually happened. And they would lose, the people who were employed on the ferry there would also lose their jobs. Now I remember that as a discussion. I mean, and I do think no matter what decision you come to, you have to have a debate on issues like that. You have to have both points of view and both perspectives lined up against each other. At the moment, what we are seeing is very much a Stornoway-dominated debate. That is not consulting people who live in other areas. It is, I mean, you and I grew up, at a time when, people from Stornoway used to call people who live in the countries, you're nothing but a mo, I'm glad these days have gone. I haven't heard that expression in many years, but I do think it is right that the people from Harris, North Uist, all the way down to Barra and Vattershay are consulted on this matter. It just is not good enough that we're having this idea put forward without involving, and as I say, the people of Skye also, whose lives.
Why is it not happening? Who are you blaming?
Oh, why am I not? Why is it not happening? I know exactly who I'm blaming. I think, I see it happening here with both the MP and the MSP working together to have these debates. And as I say, there have been lots of debates. I think they're now in the second round of debates and discussion, with trying to get this. Walsa, for instance, is the slightly more remotest island, but it's the one that depends most on the fishing community. they're unhappy because they see, the present priorities being Unst and Yell. But the discussion is taking place, and it's imperative, it seems to me, in the Western Isles that discussion takes place. And yes, I do think it's the responsibility of the MP and the MSP to undertake that, but it's also the responsibility of councillors to engage people in discussion,
and maybe all of our communities too.
All of our communities, from Ness all the way down to Battersea. I think it's imperative that discussion takes place. It's unfair on those who live in the islands of the south, that in a sense, Stornoway is getting to a priority, in this issue. Well, or is perceived as getting to a priority in this issue. I think Stornoway might have disadvantages too from it, but it's absolutely unfair, and it should be that the people from other islands. That's the norm. I'm not discussing something that I'm not saying. There's other reasons, of course, why the Faroese example does not follow. I mean, a lot of the tunnels there are built not to go under the seas, but to go on cliff tops, around cliff tops to prevent rock slides. There's also tunnels going through mountains there, and if you've been to Faroe Islands, you can see that very, very clearly. It's not a parallel to what we have. It's not an exact parallel.
Some consultations, though, aren't really worth having, because let's just take the example of the ferries. Calmac has consulted so often and for so long about the developments that were in store for us, and very little has happened, and we've now got a worse service than we had even 10 years ago.
That's true, even here in Shetland, by the way.
So transport seems a particularly thorny one for communities and all the people who should be involved to actually grasp by the scruff of the neck and do anything positive with. Is that going to change anytime soon?
I hope it does. I mean, I agree with you, for instance, that Calmac is quite clearly a distant organisation, and in a sense it would be great if it had its headquarters on an island. At least all of a sudden they would have to start considering that the difficulties of the current ferry system from their own personal perspective. I do not doubt that in the slightest, but Calmac is not an elected body. There's a difference, and in that sense it is those we elect that have responsibility to consult.
It's a company owned by
debate.
Elected people.
Oh, I agree it is. I agree with that. But what I'm saying is there is that primary responsibility has to be with those who we elect. And it'd be great to see changes in Calmac. There's absolutely no doubt. And as I say, I'm very much aware of Northlink here. We're having problems too with Northlink in Shetland. In that, once upon a time, for instance, when I travelled down to Aberdeen, I used to have the right to share a cabin with people, other individuals, and so a group of about 4 men would get together. They're now disputing that right, and they're using the idea that there are mixed gender people as one of the rather mysterious arguments for preventing that. And
this is another debate altogether.
Altogether it is. But that's what they're actually saying. That's one of the arguments. But it's making the ferry here much more expensive for individuals. And of course the cost of flights here, I mean, if you think flights are from Stornoway are expensive, I won't tell you how much the flights here cost. They're even more, they're even greater still, because the distances are much larger. The best place to fly here is Aberdeen, from Aberdeen, because it's slightly cheap, but if you fly to Inverness or you fly to Glasgow, it's very, very dear indeed. Yeah. So there's a difference in the political realities.
Have you come to a conclusion as to the way forward?
I think the way forward is, and should always be, go out. Well, actually, I'm going back to my days as an English teacher. Okay, here? And when I used to teach the kids how to do argumentative discursive writing, what I used to do was get them to take out a sheet of paper, write the word for and against in the top of the page. And when you come to something like this, you would argue you need to put down what's the argument for tunnels, what's the argument against tunnels, what are the disadvantages. And that is essential to any democratic society, that there is debate, there is discussion, and there's also democratic accountability, which also comes from debate and discussion. And again, that it's evidence-based, rather than just, how shall I put it, what looks at the moment like a silly political diversion, rather than grappling with any of the questions that are involved.
I think you're getting at tunnels again, and the principle of tunnels again.
Yes, I know. But you know what I mean? I do think it is central important that you have evidence-based argument, that you look at it, and you look at the arguments for, and you look at the arguments against. And, I firmly believe that is a central part of a democratic society.
Who knows what will happen, and who knows when we will come out the other side. That's a tunnel analogy, a tunnel metaphor there. So,
yes,
Donald,
yes.
Thank you very much for your time, for talking to us, and I hope it won't be too long before we speak again. Tapalazzo.
No, lovely. Be lovely to speak to you either, privately as even more than publicly, because at least you won't try to embarrass me all the time by asking me awkward questions.
Thank you.
But you always have done.
I have to change my number again.
Yes. So you take care, Iain. Never stay, and I hope everything's fine with you. Okay, tapalazzo. Okay, cheers.
And that was Donald S. Murray talking to us from Shetland.